your question regarding the annual rent for the Tornado building in Doha, the annual rent would be the sum of $866,718 in year one.
$866,718. Okay, and so it's about $70,000 a month.
Excuse me, sir, would you just introduce yourself again?
Sorry, Kevin Nixon, Executive Director, Overseas Property Office.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Nixon.
$18,000 a week for 14 staff. Okay, well, I mean, you know, Mr Varghese, I detected a note of exasperation that I was questioning why you actually don't get across the detail of expenditure in your department, but you know, the $194 billion that comes from the PAYE taxpayers of Australia, they don't have the ability to delegate their spending. Their spending's all committed. They follow every dollar they've got to spend. And I find it extraordinary that we can spend this amount of money without it reaching a senior officer of the department an examination.
Well, Senator, it does reach a senior officer of the department. I mean, Mr Nixon is the head of our Overseas Property Office and he holds a senior position. These matters of property contracts are also considered by a committee on new posts that's chaired by a deputy secretary. So frankly, I just don't accept your assertion that these delegations are not exercised by appropriately senior, appropriately experienced and appropriately qualified officers.
So you're fully backing the expenditure of, you know, $10,000 a square metre for a fit-out and nearly $850,000 plus a year for the lease of premises for 14 people.
Well, I think Mr Nixon explained the circumstances for the post in Doha, the cost of property, the constraints on the options we had in terms of dividable space, and the uses that we wish to put the property to. I mean, you may have a view about
whether that's
value for
area.
money or not, but he's exercising his responsibilities effectively.
Okay, and when pressed about these matters, his response was, we are responding to a decision of government on the 15th of May. That is to put a post in Doha. You know, so when we go back to test for value for money in the public interest, whether there's any income from the investment of taxpayers' money, and it doesn't meet all those tests, the answer we get then is it's a decision of government. And my question is, that's fine, but does anybody actually put a common sense test on it as to whether this is, I mean, it is the most expensive fit-out in the history of the Public Works Committee. It is twice the cost of the Commonwealth parliamentary offices in the A-grade city of Sydney. And it seems to be treated in quite a blasé manner, I think.
Well,
I find that's extraordinary.
We're not treating it in a blasé manner. I can assure you we don't treat it in a blasé manner.
Okay.
Doha is a very high-cost location to set up shop.
Okay, I understand that too, but I also understand we do 9 times more trade with Mongolia than we do with Doha. When I look to the trade figures to underpin this investment, I find $500 million, most of which will be significantly reduced by motor vehicles of $58 million, will be back to live sheep and boxed meat and no other trade. I mean, I just find it extraordinary that we can just pass that one through.
Well, we've opened in Mongolia as well, so presumably you would support that.
Well, presumably it won't come in at $10,000 a square metre.
No, because the cost of living in Ulaanbaatar and the cost of living in Doha is
We're
very
not talking
different.
about people living there, we understand that, but it's just the establishment costs are extraordinary, and the fact that you have to lease almost 3 times more space than you need is extraordinary. Anyway,
Senator,
I don't want to delay these set of estimates. I think I've laboured that point enough.
Senator Gallacher, the officer, I think, wanted to add something.
Senator, I mean, as the Secretary has said, Doha is a very expensive location. We took some independent real estate advice from an international real estate firm to help guide and ensure that the lease terms we were negotiating was appropriate. And we also took some independent quantity surveying advice to ensure that The initial estimates around the budget for construction of the fit-out, again, were reflective of that marketplace.
What can I say? I mean, I think my position is very clear. It seems an extraordinary expenditure of taxpayers' money, which doesn't meet most of the tests that are applied by the Public Works Act.
But Senator Gallacher, if I may, it obviously has been an expensive exercise, but what the officers...
It hasn't happened yet.
Well, it is obviously an expensive exercise, but what the officers have been trying to explain to you is that because of the peculiar circumstances of this post, and because, in particular, that it is a very costly location, as Mr Varghese said, to set up shop, then this is going to be an expensive exercise. Now, what the officers of DFAT, you can be reassured, have done is have made decisions conscientiously in the acquisition of material and in the entry into contracts and so on, in accordance with proper process.
Well, with respect, Minister, that is not as what has happened. There has been no attempt to set out those circumstances prior to the notification of an urgent medium works. In fact, the urgent medium works, all of this information has come about because of questions that have been asked of the department through the proposal. There was no attempt at the start to say, we're going into Doha, which is the most expensive real estate in the world. These are the parameters with which we can find some accommodation. This has all been fleshed out in a couple of hearings, so we didn't get off on the right foot. So if I move on